Very good evening to you, Kev.
Now, before we get to Angela Merkel, self-isolation is a bit of a hot topic with you right now. Please explain.
Do you know, I'm so frustrated by the lack of sort of political leadership in this country. Our vaccine rollout is going incredibly well. We've had all these millions of people who've had the first dose. We've had 30 million who've now had both doses. We've got more than 80% of the population, adult population, that have actually got antibodies to this virus. And the reason, and I know you led into that, because I have my own story. I had to go abroad last week. I've had both vaccinations. I had an antigen test before I left Spain. I arrived back in the UK. I then had my PCR done, which is a very sensitive test. That was negative. And then I got called by Trick or Treat, Test and Trace, who then banged on the door, really frightening, banged on the door, and I was told to self-isolate for 10 days. Now, hang on a minute. There is no sense in this whatsoever. Either these vaccines work and protect against variants and protect against COVID, or they don't work. And if they don't work, why are we making people have them?
And you are a doctor, so you know what you're talking about. Now, your medical assessment, as a layman, my assessment is these vaccines are clearly working, particularly if you've had both. As a doctor, you would endorse that view?
I absolutely endorse it. You know, the only way out of this is to have these vaccines. They are safe, they are effective, they work. And also, before I came on here, I just went to look at the latest data about their efficacy against Delta variant. There is no evidence at all that these vaccines don't protect against the Delta variant. So I agree with you. I think Angela Merkel is using this for her own political gain. And you've got to remember, and I worked, as you say, in the European Parliament, and what the EU loves to do is to get together and basically gang up on any other country that doesn't follow their rules. Now, you may remember in the procurement of the vaccine, the reason that Europe was so slow off the mark is because they wouldn't let individual countries decouple. They said, we have to make sure we procure as one bloc. Well, Britain actually did decouple, and it wasn't because of Brexit. I think that gave us added impetus. But the UK vaccine rollout has been much faster and much more successful than the rest of Europe. And quite frankly, I think Europe is jealous. But there's one other point. The political leadership in this country, they have squandered any gain that we had. You only have to look at the travel industry going on that march in London to say, what are we doing? We've got a world-leading vaccination rollout. We have world-leading vaccine technology in this country. And I think the problem has been because of the government's own shifting goalposts, and they are listening far too closely to the scientists and to SAGE, because ultimately this is a political decision. And what Germany is thinking is if the UK government doesn't seem to get its house in order and isn't confident on the fact that we can unlock, then why should Germany be? And I can understand that point of view. We need clear political leadership, and we're not getting it from the Prime Minister.
Should the Prime Minister be directly challenging Angela Merkel in this respect? Her outrageous call on other European countries to force British travellers into quarantine. By the way, she has no power to do that. She seems to see herself as the Queen of Europe. But in the case of the COVID crisis, every European country has gone its own way, and they are tackling this problem nationally, not federally in terms of Brussels, because Brussels made a complete mess of it. So she's talking out of her backside anyway. And surely that Boris Johnson should hit back, should he not? We shouldn't roll over and take this from this autocrat.
No, we shouldn't take it at all. And then the irony is that they're actually looking for a travel allowance within the Schengen area. Now, that's ridiculous because many of the European countries are far, far behind countries like Germany. I think the point is that, though, that I stick to is that if the UK government had been actually rigid in applying their own rules, and if we hadn't extended this lockdown and these restrictions on foreign travel, it would have then sort of endeared this feeling of actual confidence in the United Kingdom. And I think the problem has been that because it seems so wishy-washy from our government, that it's allowed other foreign governments to say, well, if the UK government doesn't seem so clear, neither are we. But yeah, we should challenge it. We absolutely should challenge it. I think there's one other point. Countries like Spain will ignore Angela Merkel. They're desperate for tourists. I was actually in Benidorm last week. It is a ghost town. And at this time of the year, it relies on Brits. There are more hotel bedrooms in Benidorm than in New York.
That's terrible. We go back to your sort of medical skill? I mean, when people like me, I'm looking at this situation and I think, well, this government is being way too cautious. We go back to the vaccine. The ordinary layman who's not medically qualified like yourself has the right to say, well, exactly what are these vaccines for? Why didn't you let us have our Freedom Day on June the 21st? And at the very least, surely July the 5th. We don't have to wait till July the 19th, do we?
No, I totally agree with that. The whole point, if you remember right at the beginning, was that we were told very clearly it would be 12 weeks to squash the sombrero. The point of the vaccines was to protect, if you remember, the elderly and the vulnerable. And it was not to protect everyone, it was to protect the elderly and the vulnerable from dying. We've done that. Less than 1% of deaths are now due to COVID. So we've actually achieved our goal many times over. And what the government has now been doing is shifting the goalposts. Suddenly, we now have to vaccinate all over 50s. Well, I can understand that because they are the group that are more likely to end up in hospitals. But why are we vaccinating younger people? And I have a major issue when it comes to vaccinating children. COVID does not cause children to become severely ill. It certainly doesn't kill children. And I would argue there is no case at all to vaccinate children. What we do need to do, however, is to encourage ethnic minorities to take up these vaccines. That is a problem because until we get the majority of the population vaccinated, which we are now doing, there will always remain holes. We will never ever defeat COVID. There will always be variants, but we have to learn to live with it.
Going back to your other skill as a very successful politician, I want to tackle you on this issue of Boris's leadership. It is just typical of this country these days, isn't it, that we have somebody like Angela Merkel basically bad mouthing us all over the continent, all over the world, really. Don't forget, this is the woman that irresponsibly said, don't take the AstraZeneca vaccine because it is ineffective in the over 60s. And she was so chastened by that mistake that she had to roll up her sleeves and publicly have the ignominy of the British injection in her arm because she was just wrong. And by the way, Angela Merkel is 66. So there goes that mistake by her. But, you know, here she is bad mouthing us on the continent, effectively all over the world. We need to hit back, don't we?
I think we do need to hit back, but also, the United Kingdom is a strong and powerful global player. We need to be very clear. I think it's interesting, actually, with America as well. They're worried about the Delta variant, but there is no scientific evidence behind this. The point is that what we do need to do is to be really clear about what our criteria are for opening. I don't think the public will delay much longer. I don't think the public will actually tolerate any extension of these quarantine measures. I think people have behaved incredibly well and people are desperate to go on holiday. And it is time that the European governments realise that they need British money. We need to hit back. If they don't want us, we'll spend our money elsewhere.
Final point, David, again on the political front. You can understand Boris is desperate to host the final of the Euros at Wembley. So when UEFA threatened to move it to Rome, because of COVID restrictions that they'd have to go through if they came to Britain. Basically, the 2,500 UEFA officials, the VIPs, have been excused all COVID rules and regulations. No vaccine proof, no testing, no quarantine, nothing. They just come here, they go to the match, they have a good time. Do you think that's a political mistake by Boris in terms of compliance? Because I think millions of people are going to look at that decision and say, oh, I see, it's one rule for them and one for us. I think compliance going forward after that decision is going to be a problem for Boris, isn't it?
I totally agree. I tweeted about it yesterday, and the number of responses I've had saying exactly that. It's one rule for them and it's one rule for us. As a law-abiding citizen, as I've said, someone who's had 2 vaccines, suddenly to be treated in the way I have by the fact that I'm called and text every single day. I've had people banging on my door telling me to isolate, and yet they're letting these UEFA people in without any of these checks. Seems to me wrong. It seems to be creating apartheid, and I think people have had enough of this. And I think you're going to see, if Boris doesn't unlock this country soon, I think it's going to end very messily.
When they bang on your door, David, what do they say?
actually, the guy who banged on my door, and I was absolutely terrified by it, he'd parked in the road, he banged on the door and he said, "I'm here to check that you're actually at home." And I felt it was a massive invasion of privacy. And I said to him, "Look, as a medic, this is absolutely nonsensical. The fact is, I've had the vaccines. I know I'm negative because I've had the PCRs. There are no other tests to be done. So why on earth should I quarantine?" And made the point that I'd made earlier on. And his response to me was, "Yes, I know you know more than me because you're a doctor." Now, they're in an invidious position. But what are we doing? Test and trace was important at the beginning. I think it's a nonsense. It's got to stop.
David, excellent words. I was going to ask you out for a drink very soon, but I guess we'll have to wait 10 days.
No, I'm nearly there. 5 more.
Okay, mate. Well, after that, thank you so much. Dr. David Bull there, Deputy Leader of the Reform UK Party.